Midnight Motorist is one of the most heavily debated FNAF minigames in the whole series. In order to make sense of the story though, we have to give a bit of background information, as well as accept the idea that I think William Afton does have a motive for killing Charlie. It could just be that he's drunk, but I personally think him and Henry have had some kind of falling out, because they clearly have in the books, and while I know the books aren't supposed to answer the lore questions, they give us a retelling of events essentially. So if you can go in with an open mind, let's dig in. First, let's try to establish a motive for William Afton, knowing that it's possible there isn't necessarily a motive per se. Sometimes people are just bad, but it seems that he's obsessed with creating forms of life, and he's a bit of a mad scientist in a sense. Fusing things with souls, trapping souls in animatronic prisons, he's not a good guy. He seems power obsessed, eager to create life beyond what we know, which again does line up really nicely with the Silver Eyes trilogy, and the way that William Afton is portrayed in that. He's obsessed with the spark of light that Henry has created, and he wants to duplicate it more than anything, sacrificing plenty of other people just to try and make this happen. And so regardless if the motive is similar in the games and the books, the important thing to note for our in-game William Afton is that he is obsessed with creating life in nearly every rendition of him that there is, while his other contributing factor being Henry Emily, as we know him currently. Whether or not Edwin ties into all this, we'll discuss after the theory. What's important is that in pretty much every FNAF format we have right now, Henry and William are heavily connected in the story. So while we haven't gotten a lot of that backstory yet in the game series, I think it's safe for us to assume that Henry was a big reason that William did the things that he did before Midnight Motorist. And so I'm going to go with that mindset for this narrative, just so that we have something to work with. If Crying Child dies before William kills Charlie, the pieces start falling into place for this theory. So at some point in 1983, Michael helps lift his brother, the Crying Child, into the Fredbear animatronic's mouth, where it chomps down on his head and he later dies. This forces Henry and William to close down Fredbear's family diner where this event took place. Later, as Crying Child's life fades away, he hears William tell him, "I will put you back together." This isn't some loving promise he's making to his son. No, this is his chance to experiment with creating life using a human subject to do better than Henry could. So William jumps at the chance to try and create life again. When his son is dead, he does a bunch of tests, experiments, etc., but none of it works. Ultimately, he fails at replicating Henry's impressive work, and so he gathers whatever's left of Crying Child's body after the experiments, gives up, and buries him until further notice, angry and frustrated at his failure. One night, not long after this, he's still fuming. Maybe him and Henry got into a fight about Fazbear Entertainment's future. Maybe they aren't even on speaking terms anymore since Fredbear's closed. Maybe he was just angry that he hadn't duplicated Henry's success yet. Regardless of what happened that day, he was angry at Henry. He needed to get back at Henry because in his mind, Henry is the reason that William is miserable and unfulfilled. And he was drunk. William's driving around drunk, pulls up to Fazbear's, not really sure which location, but it doesn't matter for this theory. He sees Charlie outside and thinks up an awful idea. It's time to get back at Henry for the frustration he's caused him, the hours of miserable toil to try and create what only Henry could. Now I can get even, he thinks. So he does the unthinkable. He kills Charlie. If I can't create life, I can at least take it. So he takes her life and drives away. This is where Midnight Motorist begins. After William kills Charlie, he hurries back to his car, pedal to the metal as he drives along. He drives wildly home, crazed, angry, and probably thrilled at what he's done. In his drunken stupor, he stops the car and first checks on where he buried his son to make sure nothing has been uprooted and that his secret is safe, making sure the rain hasn't exposed his little project. He gets back in the car, but having gone to the place where his project lies, it reminds him of why he's so angry in the first place, and he decides he needs more drinks to wash this all away. The booze may even be wearing off at this point, and the reality of what he's done this evening might be seeping in as well. This was an actual murder he could get in huge trouble for. So he pulls up to Junior's. Now what is Junior's? Junior's is a restaurant that likely also contained a bar, at least that's what I think it is. My personal theory is that Junior's used to be a Fazbear diner, and could possibly be the same location where William's son was bit, but that's a whole nother theory. The Silver Eye trilogy mentions that Fredbear Diner may have had a bar area. There was a slightly elevated stage at the end of the room, and Charlie realized as she looked around that the place had probably once been a dance hall, and the long desk by the entrance that her parents had used for a cash register had probably been a bar. She went over to it and saw that she was right. There were even grooves and scratches in the wood floor, where bar stools had once dug their feet. So to me, it's perfectly possible that this Fazbear Diner location gets repurposed into Junior's, but not confirmed. Regardless of that discussion though, William is turned away. He's here for the drinks, but he is stopped outside and is told that he shouldn't be here and that he shouldn't make it more difficult than it has to be. So William drives away. He heads home, even angrier than before not getting his drinks, and entering the house is met with someone sitting on the chair watching TV, telling him to leave him alone tonight. He had a rough day. I want to present the he in question as being Michael Afton for this theory, but we'll come back to him though. This person in the chair seems to have some authority over William Afton, or is at least on an equal playing field with him. So for the sake of simplicity, I am addressing this person as William Afton's significant other, the one a lot of people call Mrs. Afton. But it could just as easily be another character like William's dad or another family relative. The character seems protective of the child, at least in a loose sense. They care enough to try and persuade William to go easy on the child today, but they aren't invested enough to do anything further necessarily. Which might imply that William often abuses Michael in some way or other, and that William being drunk is a common occurrence due to the unsurprised attitude, body language, and comments from this seated person. They don't even look up, they just acknowledge his presence and continue watching TV. It's possible they're still grieving over the loss of crying child as well and just don't have anything to say. They may also be trying to preserve themselves from harm if William is an abusive person. It's best to just stay out of things and not escalate them. I'm not a good authority on knowing how abused victims should or shouldn't act, so I don't want to pass judgment on this person or accuse them of being negligent when they may be doing their very best to de-escalate things, or they have found in the past that not saying a lot keeps everyone safer than addressing things head on, which would only lead to further escalation. None of this conversation stops William from trying to enter Michael's room, however. So he goes down the hallway and knocks on the door, telling Michael, "I told you not to close your door." He isn't met with a response, so he mutters to himself, "This is my house, you can't ignore me like that." So he bangs on the door and shouts, "Open the door!" Then he mutters, "I'll find a way in from outside." So he goes back outside. There is no further conversation from the person in the chair. So when William circles around the house later to where Michael's room is, he finds the window broken and he says, "Ran off to that place again." He will be sorry when he gets back. He also sees human footprints leading off screen. Next to the footprints is a single set of what we assume to be animatronic footprints. There is only one pair of them, which seems like they arrived here supernaturally. And before we move on, what if the reason Mrs. Afton mentions that he's had a rough day is because Michael's been having dreams about his brother, the crying child? He's constantly reliving the trauma of that fateful birthday of his brother. He feels guilty. The FNAF movie's version of Mike never got over his brother being kidnapped and desperately tries to find out who took him. In the Silver Eyes trilogy, Charlie's driving motive is solving the murder and kidnapping of both her brother and her best friend. It's not unlikely that Michael in the FNAF games is experiencing a similar dilemma. His motivation is different in that it's his own personal guilt instead of his sibling being kidnapped or murdered, but crying child's death affects him in an all-consuming way, just like the movie and book characters' trauma affects them. He feels responsible and is unable to escape his dreams of his brother. Only, he isn't simply dreaming. Fredbear haunts his thoughts and mind. On this particular day, Michael has been extra distraught over his brother, possibly thinking that he sees Fredbear throughout the day, kind of like he's hallucinating it. This likely makes him think he's losing his mind, and in his desperation to deny its physical existence, he confides some of his troubled thoughts to his mother. His mother sees how distraught he is and just assumes that he's grieving in his own strange way, and so she sends him to his room to rest his troubled soul, making a mental note to tell William to go easy on him tonight since he's had such a horrible day. But when Michael returns to his room after talking to Mrs. Afton, he truly does see Fredbear standing there at the window. This time, there's no denying it. It's not an apparition. And this time, Fredbear speaks. "It's me," Fredbear says. Michael can't believe it. His brother's actually talking to him. He breaks through the window and leaves immediately with his brother. Since Mrs. Afton has the TV on, she doesn't actually hear any of this take place. The Fredbear's footprints are positioned in such a way that the animatronic would be facing directly at Michael's window, so if he looks out, he's going to see Fredbear. But now, let's get back to William. William immediately knows where Michael has gone, but where would Michael have gone? Where is that place? I want to say that that place Michael ends up at is Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where the Spring Bonnie and Fredbear were likely stored after the bite at the Fredbear Family Diner. We know of at least one Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that was opened in 1983. The FNAF cookbook even confirms a Freddy Pizza place opening in 1983, so the fact that there's a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza open could further strengthen the argument that this is where Michael went if Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were stored at this location. It would make more sense why Crying Child would call him to follow him to that location. Michael likely doesn't know William's experiments have happened, but he would probably know that the Fredbear animatronic was likely sent to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to be stored away after the family diner was shut down. He may be snooping around Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, eager for any kind of closure with his brother. It's likely that Michael has been going to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza often, in a desperate attempt, grasping at straws to somehow do anything to make amends of losing his brother or connect with him somehow. They've possibly even been in contact supernaturally, kind of like how Charlie and Silver Eyes keeps thinking that someone is talking to her in a strange way, or how the FNAF movie Michael talks to the ghost kids. I don't really think this is that far-fetched either, especially since Michael Afton has communicated with spirits on multiple occasions. But William doesn't want him snooping around Fazbear's though. William may not have been able to resurrect his son how he wanted to just yet, but he's far from done experimenting. At this point, he may even be mentally prepping himself for the murders he commits not long after. Why not use other kids to further his twisted goals as well? Success is worth any price after all, in his mind. Anyway, after finding the footprints and broken window, William comes up with his method to make Michael sorry for leaving again. A justified punishment, so to speak. He decides Michael himself will be his next test subject, which is shown in the events of FNAF 4. It works out perfectly for William. Michael will be terrified of the animatronics instead of trying to dig into things he shouldn't be digging into, and it will let William further his own progress. Two birds with one stone, a true win for William. So that's Midnight Motorist in a nutshell, or is it? See, there's a few more details we need to bring up. First, I think there might be another reason that William doesn't want Michael going to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It's possible that the Fredbear animatronic is no longer at the location, and here's why. It could have been stolen by William for his experiments. If Michael finds out that Spring Bonnie is there but not Fredbear, he might get suspicious of what William's up to. William's taken the animatronic and turned it into the one and only Dreadbear that we see in Help Wanted. The timeline becomes a bit tricky here because while Fall Fest 83 is happening, we see the Dreadbear animatronic wandering out, which would mean William would have had to have stolen the animatronic before the events of Midnight Motorist. And if that's the case, did Fredbear appear at Michael's window, or did Dreadbear appear at Michael's window? There's also an argument that Golden Freddy is partially possessed by Crying Child, but I guess I don't really want to go into that whole thing here. I just want to bring it up as food for thought. And really quick, before I end this video, I want to discuss Henry, Edwin, and the whole Silver Eye trilogy where Henry creates advanced animatronic life in some form. If that is in the game timeline, I don't think we've touched on it yet in the games. I think the Secret of the Mimic would be the first thing that kind of brings that up. And so even if the Henry in the games hasn't created some form of life, it's possible that Edwin had. So whether Henry and William steal Edwin's creation, or if Henry is Edwin, at some point Henry or Edwin or whoever has figured out animatronic life in a sense, or receives the credit for advanced animatronic AI, and maybe William doesn't. So we don't really know like William's motive yet, so we're kind of speculating there. But one comment I got on my last video said, what if Edwin was going by his middle name, and so his full name would end up being Edwin Henry Murray? Essentially what I was trying to get at was that the Silver Eyes version of Henry and the Pizzaplex version of Edwin, essentially the game Edwin is going to be a merging of those two characters, and so he kind of fills in some of the gaps while not taking away from our Henry in the game timeline, if that makes any sense. So you'll still have our Henry who created these prisons. In the Insanity ending, he talks about all his regrets about William and the awful things William's done. But Edwin would be the one that originally created the life of the characters. So he has the supernatural element that William covets in the books that Henry created. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's just a little more speculation I wanted to add on to the whole thing, because it gets confusing being like, well, Henry made this, but actually Edwin made this. And so I just bring up a lot of the similarities in that video to kind of understand where I'm coming from with Henry and Edwin and all that. I kind of think Edwin's going to be a mixture of some of the characters from the books, filling in some of those roles in the game timeline. I'm veering way off topic, so I apologize about that. That's pretty much all I've got. I hope this theory was helpful for some of you, and if not, let me know what you think. I love discussing this with you, so let's have at it.